Hello, everyone. You're listening to the Small Business Show. My name is Swire Ho. You can also call me the promo guy. My guest today is Eric Holtzclaw. He is the Chief Strategist and Dojo Master at Liger, where is the resident expert in guiding businesses to find their identity and core values, craft their vision, and establish their brands. He is a serial entrepreneur and host of the Claw podcast, where he interviews business owners and entrepreneurs. Eric has contributed to magazines and online publications and wrote the book Lettering: Unlocking the Potential of Consumer Behavior. How are you doing, Eric?
I'm good. Good afternoon.
Eric, I before the show, I just watched another interview that you did with Dan Jordan. I have so many questions that I asked for you, but before I jump ahead too quickly, for people who just tune in, what should they know about you and your work at Liger?
So at Liger, we are a B2B marketing firm. So we primarily work with B2B companies. We do a little bit in the B2C space. I accidentally started the company back in 2018, so I can't seem to help myself. So it may be because I'm unemployable. So I started doing this entrepreneurship very early in my career. And when you do it kind of early, then people are like, how do you ever actually get a real job? And I don't ever really have a real job. I just end up starting little companies that do things. So yeah.
I like that where you say, entrepreneur, unemployable. I think about that all the time. Like if I would look for a job right now, what do I really do? Like I seem to do a lot of things, but then I don't have the resume or the criteria to do everything, but I do all of those every day, every single day.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of hard for us to pinpoint where an entrepreneur lives. And I think entrepreneurs over their career change. So they're parts of what they like to do. And then they learn that they like to do something else, and then they kind of perfect that, and then they move on to something else. So that doesn't necessarily lend itself well to being like a career climber in a corporation, because those people typically stay within one part of the organization. Mm-hmm. And entrepreneurs, you got to learn everything from running the books to how your business runs to all kinds of things along that path.
Yeah, sometimes I think it's a lifestyle choice too to become an entrepreneur.
Absolutely.
Would you rather to have the uncertainty, but then the reward could be great, or you rather to be in a big, a secure company and do the same thing for 30 years? There's no right or wrong. It's just a lifestyle choice.
Yeah. And I mean, that's an interesting point you make too. I don't know. It used to be like corporations were very secure. You could stay in that company for a long time, but if you're working for someone else, they have control of your destiny. So they can choose to either promote you, demote you, fire you, whatever. If you're an entrepreneur, yeah, it's risky, but at the same time, you are your own boss. And so either you make it work or you don't. And you're the only person who's to blame for that. So you have a little bit more control potentially at the end of the day, even though the risks feel greater on the entrepreneurial side.
Yeah, Eric, thanks. I think this question is very important. And I know as a company, you talk to a lot of different entrepreneurs, you help them to succeed. You also have your own podcast and you interview your guests. So from talking to a lot of them, what have you learned? And you said, there's top 10 lesson from talking with all these people. Can you mind sharing this with us?
Yeah, so there's several. So what I did, I was selling a business back in the day, and I'd been told that I needed to start standing on stages, and I really wasn't a front kind of person. And so I started a podcast because it was at that point you didn't do video and those types of things. So I was like, hey, I'm just going to interview entrepreneurs and find out what was it in the ecosystem that either made them successful or not. And I expected them to tell me access to money or things like that. And what I learned was completely different. So really being an entrepreneur is about being very, very dogged, you're consistent, and not giving up. So always kind of looking at how you can accomplish something, saying yes. So, that you read all these things about telling people they tell you, oh, say no, make sure that you protect your time and yada, yada, yada. I've received more opportunities out of saying yes to a thing, even a weird thing. Like, would you come to this event, or would you try doing this project for us as a client or whatever? So those saying yes opportunities are really important, and understanding the source of why you're an entrepreneur. So entrepreneurs fall into kind of two categories. They're either rectifies, meaning that somebody told them early in their career or earlier in their life that they weren't going to be successful. And they said, I'll show you. Or magnify, meaning that you came from a really a good background and were kind of put on a pedestal. And so you believe maybe that you are better than most people. And that's not a bad thing. Those kind of individuals end up building really big businesses. And to give you an example of that, Steve Jobs, who you would think was a rectify because he was adopted as a child, actually was a magnify. And the reason he was a magnify is when he was about 9 years old, he found out he'd been adopted. And so he went to his parents and he said, "Hey, mom and dad, somebody, I was adopted. Somebody didn't want me." And his parents said, "Oh, no, Steve, you don't understand. We chose you." And by telling him that he was chosen, he kind of lived the rest of his life as the chosen one. So I say all that to say that those are the two categories. There are people in this world that were not built to be entrepreneurs. So if you had a really nice childhood and things went well and you kind of like your 9 to 5 job and your weekends and you have hobbies and stuff like that, you're probably not going to be a great entrepreneur. That's not a problem. Those kind of people have potentially healthier lives than some of us who have chosen the entrepreneurial path, right? Because they play golf on the weekend and they have all these other things. Those us that are entrepreneurs and are really being driven by something. You've got this like desire to really take care of that, and that ends up becoming all consuming at times as you try to put something together and make it work.
Since you're on that point, Eric, I have a different take on that, and it depends on who I'm talking to, right? There are people who are really high achiever, and then they will work until they drop dead at the office, right? That's their life, all their life they want to be in business. On the other hand, we also have people, myself included, try to build a business around my lifestyle. So you mentioned that you might not have a hobby. I have tons of hobbies. And what I like to do and to justify those hobbies is to learn more and then to connect with the people to other business relationship I can form by attending this meeting. Or when I go work out at the gym, can I find something to be more valuable to my client? So what's your take on that? Like, do you think that we should just work until we drop that? Or what do you think, like, the most successful ones, are they really have no life other than work, or do they wanted to make, let's say, $100 million, right? And then I'm retired.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. So you've made the choice of building lifestyle business, which I think is a really great way of looking at it. And if I could go back and be smarter, I probably would do a lifestyle business, so one that you kind of have a little bit more of that balance. I'm easily bored. And so I really like all the challenges that come at me, and I don't know how to turn it off. So when I wake up in the morning, I'm already thinking about what's going on, what's happening next. I have problems even falling asleep. So the way my brain is functioned and put together, I'm always kind of thinking of those challenges. When I talk about those rectifies versus magnifies, I'm thinking of like the most famous entrepreneurs that people think about. Typically, those people fall into those different categories. And when people think about entrepreneurship, they also think about building something really big, right? So and that isn't, I'm not saying that that's right. Like, that's just what kind of, if you're going to be a rock star, which is what entrepreneurs are considered nowadays, they all want to be the next Taylor Swift in the entrepreneurial world, right? But lifestyle businesses are great. Like, if you find something you really like to do, like selling insurance or consulting with people or whatever, and that is something you can then build into your life, and it satisfies you, right? That's really the thing about it, is do you feel fulfilled at the end of the day? And so if you feel fulfilled in that capacity, then you should absolutely lean into that. For me, I know that it's always what's next. Like, I'm always thinking about what's next. And so that in some ways means I need to build an organization that's big enough to let me go focus on the what's next, because I've built something behind me that still needs to be maintained and taken care of. And I get easily bored. I don't do well. Like, once I've created something, I got to have somebody else run it and manage it. I couldn't do the same thing every day. And so thinking about that mindset and making sure you build your company in a way that satisfies that, right? So, but it's not wrong or right. It's just different for each person.
Yeah, that's what is fun being an entrepreneur. There's not really a set of rules. People like to set a certain step or rules for you, but then you could be a plumber making a lot of money. You could be a rocket scientist who makes no money at the end, right? So it really depends on how you perceive the journey. And I think for the last 2 years, for example, it kind of exploded, because now people are more drawn to, and a lot of people are, starting their own video, like they are drawn to a certain energy. People can tell right away when you talk or when you do certain things if you're passionate or not. Like even if you're an influencer, you host all kinds of sponsorship. If you're not genuine, people turn up really quickly. So I think the key to success for entrepreneurship is really be passionate about what you do, and people can tell right away.
You absolutely have to be passionate about it. If you're not going to be passionate about it, you shouldn't do it. Like that's the number one thing. You should really want to eat, live, and breathe whatever it is that you do, because it's going to be the way you're going to be successful. And like you said, like people can smell the fake. Like if you're just faking it, trying to make it through, that's not going to attract the kind of customers you need, the kind of audience that you want, those types of things to really make sure that it's going to be worth your time at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's great. I love our conversation. Before we got on, Eric, I asked you about B2B, right? The touch part. I thought I read is 7 touch points only, but then you told me something different. Would you mind sharing it with us again?
Yeah. So the traditional thinking is in the marketing space that it's like 7 to 10 touch points to get somebody to convert. And that is true back in the old Don Draper Mad Men days, when you were trying to like get a message in front of the mass audiences. Nowadays, we have so many messages coming to us so often, so many of them are not that unique, that number has ballooned. And so it's somewhere between 18 to 21 times before you really establish awareness. And that awareness needs to be established over time. So people, just because you send them 18 messages at once doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be successful. You want that to be kind of over time. And this specifically happens in what we call B2B. Now, there's B2B and B2C. And when you think about that, B2B is buying software for my company or whatever. B2C might be buying a brand new kind of soda, right? Mm-hmm. The difference really is it a relational sale? So B2B is relational and it's high risk. So if I make a decision on the B2B side, let's say I decide to bring a new piece of software into my company and it's a bad choice, I could get fired. Mm-hmm. So I have to be very careful about making that choice. So I'm going to take a longer amount of time. I'm going to look at things outside of, the things your company owns. I want to see things in social and articles and all that kind of stuff to make my choice. If it's transactional, so it's like a soda, maybe will only take 7 times, because if I go buy a soda and I don't like it, I throw it away. It doesn't bother anyone. Even something as significant as purchasing a car is really just transactional. I bought a car years ago. My wife is an Auburn fan. And I bought a car and it was Alabama colors. And Alabama is a big rival to Auburn. And so I drove the car home, took my wife out to dinner, took her home, didn't even think about it. And I took a friend out the next day and my friend was like, I'm really surprised that April let you buy this car. And I was like, what do you mean? And they said, well, it's Alabama colors. And I was like, you're right, it is Alabama colors. And so I got home that night and I was like, I bought this car and it's like Alabama colors. And she's like, yeah, you only keep a car every 2 years, it'll be gone. So even though that seems like a very significant purchase, the only person it really impacted was me and my wife, right? It wasn't this huge deal. Now, if I buy a piece of software at my company, we start to implement it, we get 6 months down the way, it doesn't do what I thought it was going to do, it costs more money, I could get fired by my boss. So I'm going to spend a lot more time thinking about what that decision is before I decide to pull the trigger. So that's where the 21 comes in. And then from a sales perspective, it's another 5 to 7 on top of that to get someone to actually convert. And those salespeople stop at 3 outreach. So you spend all this time getting someone interested, and then the salesperson gives up on 3. So you really have to carry that thing all the way to the end to make sure you're going to be successful with your spend on the sales and marketing side in the B2B or relational space.
Well, I always want to think about this question. Obviously, I want it to be answered to my perspective and for others. And I know you're a straight shooter. You answer it the way that it is. So for a smaller business, right? So for a small business size, if I really wanted to or need to spend on one thing in marketing or in the overall process, what would that be? Or do you not agree that you only spend on one thing?
If you only were going to spend on one thing, I would spend on content.
Okay.
All day long. Content is discoverable by the search engines. If it's written well, you need that content to live in your own kind of owned digital properties with some kind of connection to it. It's also the thing that you see the slow burn on. So if I write a piece of content and it really is relevant to my customer, I may not see anything when I first launch it, but over a period of time, I'll start to see additional traffic to it if it's done well. I wrote an article for Inc., I think back in 2012 about the 10, I think I called it 10 simple marketing tips.
Mm-hmm.
And if you Google, you'll still end up finding that article. Now, I wouldn't propose any of those tips today, but because of the way that it's written, the keywords that were used, it still has a good payoff. And so of all the things, people will launch their website and they typically launch it like a catalog. Like, these are all the things that we do. Google doesn't care about that at all. Google is not there to send traffic to you at all. They're there to curate answers to questions that people are asking. And that's becoming more and more true as we get into this world of AI. So by having content around what I do that's educational in nature, that's the number one spend. And then everything else around it, social, ads, video, whatever, needs to push through that content.
What I'm seeing, and I'm sure that you're aware of this too, Eric. With AI, right? We have bots that write for us now, and it seems like all the blogs that I read and when I research for different topics are just written for SEO or for Google. It's not, if you're a human, you're reading that, you're not reading anything at all. Like when you read through the article, you learn nothing. You saw maybe 6 or 7 ads, and that was it. Do you think that it's more tricky, is more difficult to have good content out there to be able to discover?
Yeah, I mean, I hear so writing for SEO used to be more of a thing. It's not as much. Google sniffs that out. So it knows whether or not the content is written for a human or for SEO. So they have ways. Hey, I think they implemented some AI, right, to like kind of look at those pieces. And it is about popularity of that content. So how much time are people spending going through it? So it has to be useful. If a human being's not reading it, spending time on it, then it's not going to be something that's even paid attention to. Google's not even fully indexing all the blogs. Like, we have some clients who have 600 blog posts, and we're getting them to cut them down to just the top 100 that are receiving traffic. So it's not enough just to put out content. It's certainly not enough to have AI write it for you. Like, that's a good starting point. I really think that's a great starting point, but curation. So like, what are you going to add to it? How do you know that it's really effective? What are you telling me that's new and unique? And if you look at some of the new ideas around what Google search is going to look like, it's going to look like a Wikipedia entry. So instead of giving you a listing of sites to go to, it's going to define the thing that you asked about. And we'll have embedded links within that then link you to the site that they got the source from. So being the company or the group that gives the answer to a Google search is going to become an incredibly important part of what we think about as we start to put together this stuff moving forward. So, yeah.
Well, I think it's also, it takes time, right? You mentioned that content is, if you only do one thing, it's content. It takes time to do. And I think for your listener or for people who come upon your website, they need time to trust you. If they don't trust you, you're just the same as everyone. And as a podcast host, I know that you need time to craft the question. You need to be engaged with the audience. You have to know who the audience are. If they trust you, they will tune in and believe in what you're trying to tell them. But if I tune into someone that I know I wouldn't listen to that person, then whatever that they say, I will never do that. So I think it takes time to develop that trust, and you have to maintain that trust. And you can't, if you go past that point and you do some stupid things, and you lose people very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And the trust is not built necessarily on your own properties. So if you think about the things you own, like your website and your blog and all those, you need to make sure you're putting content and other things outside, because that's how you're going to get people captured in, and then they'll start to pay attention to things that you own. Everyone knows the trick nowadays. If I go to your website, you're probably going to start following me around with ads. You're going to know that I showed up on your website. So I avoid doing that until very late in my customer buyer journey. And I look at other places, like, are there places you posted something on Medium, or were you on somebody's podcast and I saw it on social? Those are the ways that you start to drive that trusted traffic to things that are more closely aligned and specifically on your brand. So how do you build that web? Like, what does that spider web look like that's all around pulling people into your website? And then thinking about your website as a magazine instead of a catalog. So how does it tell stories versus just telling me what you do? Because I probably know what you do if I know what your company does, What I want to know is like the stories about how it was useful, impacted somebody, the people behind the scenes that are actually doing the work. Those are the things that are really interesting and important to me in that decision-making process.
Love to get your take on that, especially in the B2B space, right? So I know you talk about software. Let's say something that is really a long sales cycle, something that is expensive, right? Company can spend a lot of money and put in, maybe go to trade show, maybe do email campaign, do all that they do to get a customer in the door. But a lot of time when I talk to customer, I ask them, what do you do to market and re-engage with your, repeat client? A lot of time they would look at me and we don't spend any money, like they are paying us already. Why would we market to them? What's your take on that? Like how would you balance, what I just said?
So I'm a recovering technologist. I ran development shops early in my career. Then I owned a research company for a period of time, and now I'm in the marketing world because it's kind of a combination of understanding your customer and technology. And the reason I say that is where technology only impacts one part of the business, research typically is one category. Marketing is the kind of cradle to grave thing that your customers experience all along the path. And so if all you're worried about is quote unquote conversion, getting someone to sign on the dotted line or click on the button, and you don't think about marketing beyond that, there's a very good chance you're going to sully the reputation that you created as you try to get them into that funnel, and or may not get the full benefit of that customer moving forward. So referrals to other people that they know, other projects and things you could do for them. So marketing doesn't end when the customer begins. That's really not even 10% of the way through the journey. You've got to do things like win back programs and reminders and letting them know what else you do. And customers have a tendency to put your company into a pigeonhole. So they'll think that you only do one thing where you may provide a full set of services, and that value, the lifetime value of that client, the share of wallet that you could get from them could be far greater if you continue to market what you do and talk to them about the things that they need and how you kind of add to either the product or service they purchased. So, and you want that messaging to be on point. So it's kind of interesting where you spend all this time fine tuning your voice and who you are and what you say. Then they become a customer and the messages that they receive are not at all aligned to what they saw when they experienced sort of the initial part of that buyer journey. So yeah, what's fun about it is it doesn't end. The work doesn't end. You're always thinking about it. And then your customer's changing, like they're moving from one platform to another, and video becomes a big thing. And now you got to think about AI. So there's a lot of like switching and adjusting along the way if you're doing marketing correctly.
Yeah, and in terms of a salesperson, right? Maybe you're doing in a B2B space, maybe you're getting a really small order. So then your client just want to try it out and see how you perform, right? So if you don't follow up with them, how are you going after like the entire company? Maybe one department is using what you do, and they have 100 departments that could also do what you do. If you don't follow up, if you don't, like Eric said, let them know these are the other stuff that we can help, or I'm helping you with this. Maybe your marketing department, your human resources department can also be benefit from what we do. Would you mind referring us or make an introduction? It's a lot easier once you're kind of in the door, right? You set up in their vendor or supplier platform, whatever, then to add on to that conversation. So if you stop there, then you never go to the next step.
Yeah, and we've seen so many of our clients, they want to work with one person, right? So they one team, even though there's multiple solutions. And so the more you can do for a client, if you gain their trust, the greater the kind of opportunity you have within that company or that client to increase your revenue without necessarily signing another one. And you already understand the client, how it works and how to get paid and all those kind of things. Far cheaper cost of acquisition than trying to get a new one.
Yeah, it's always cheaper to maintain a client than to get new ones. Like I don't care what industry that you're in, B2C or B2B, is always when people are happy, when people are thrilled with what you do, they'll tell people that are really, they actually warmed you up for that call. Like if you cold call anyway, what if you get, a couple of leads that are, people talk you up for it, and all you have to do is just to, showcase what you have.
Yep, absolutely. Yep.
So Eric, I think the conversation is, and I know I want to really, find your answer for it. You talk about your website not being a brochure. And a lot of time when I talk to entrepreneur, they want to tell others how great we are. These are the feature and benefits. These are all the acronyms that we have, all the, experience that we have. But as a consumer, as a buyer, sometimes I don't really care what you do. Like I only care about myself. So in the study, in the approach that you will advise your client, like how would you guide them through the process? Like, there are huge, department, but then there seems to be a disconnect of what the other end wanted to buy or wanted to see.
Yeah. So, I mean, when we're going through and evaluating a company, and this is a thing for any of your listeners to look at, if your website includes a lot of we language, we, then that's a problem. If it's all about we started this, we did that, we blah, 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 right? So your language on your website should be you. So, and you can turn any we sentence into a you sentence. So it's about how that person who may be buying from you sees themselves in the solution, the product, whatever that you're offering. So you do need a website that kind of provides some, like who are your team members and what kind of awards do you have and what jobs are open and things like that. The rest of the things you create for your website should go into some kind of educational content section. So it should be around, and an example I use because it's a pretty boring example is like a tire store. Right. So like I could go to a tire store and you could tell me all the kinds of tires that you sell. I know nothing about tires, literally nothing. I know that I bust tires open off.
You need it, but I don't really know what I'm using.
I don't know anything about them. Right. And so I could go to your tire store and I'm like, cool, you sell tires. I don't even know if I need an R40 or F50. I have no idea. Right. But if you give me educational content about like what tires should I be using when I'm driving in the winter and what's the right pressure, like things like that, you've become a useful tool to me because those are things I don't know. And really all I want to know are the things I need to know about how to keep those tires maintained and whatever. So turning your content into something that's more of an interesting story, something that's going to kind of keep me engaged. This is why almost every show on HGTV is just a commercial, right? Like every show about like building
product placement,
rock wall, it's product placement. That's all it is, right? Or, the cooking shows or whatever, oh, I'm going to cook that great casserole. Now I have to go and buy the pan and I got to buy the thing and I got to have all these ingredients and whatever, which probably you don't, but you've seen these things. And now because it's been entertaining and educational, you're far more likely to go out and like execute against it. If I just tell you the mundane ins and outs and those are going to change, I don't even understand what they are. And the risk of using your own acronyms, the risk of like using funny words and calling things that people don't think about is it will not translate when they are searching for it. So if they are searching for something, you need to make sure what they are searching for translates properly to your site. So if you call something on your site the thingamajig and nobody knows what a thingamajig is, nobody's going to search for a thingamajig, right? So they're searching for whatever that does. And when they do that, your site needs to come up and it needs to be very clear that the search they did for this problem they're trying to solve is solved by that product or service. And it can't be a funny name. You can get to the funny when you kind of get further down the path. But to begin with, it needs to be very much like you think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's like, food and shelter, like, is this in line with what I'm looking for? And then you can start to pull me down the path to kind of what you talk about and why it's important.
It's funny on the name thing. On the one hand, I agree with what you said. On the other hand, there are people who come up with weird names and gadgets or whatever that they do, and they own the space. So it really do depend on, if you have penetrate your market and everyone knows you as the, whatever name that you call it, right? Yahoo.
You just typically have to have a lot of money to own a category like that. And most companies we work with don't have that kind of money or are not willing to spend it on marketing to get to that. And often what they have is very similar to what their competitor has. They've just used some kind of funny name so it's different. But haven't moved around enough. So now my lights turned off. So anyway, so thinking about what your client's going to look for is more important. And then understanding creating a category takes a lot of money and takes something very, very unique in order for you to like become the next Xerox or the next Uber or the next whatever.
Since you're on that question, I think this I have to ask, as a small business entrepreneur and for the listener. So, what if you're in the same space as a really big competitor in the B2B space, right? So, what you just said, you need money, obviously, to spend in marketing with, all the touch points that they have. The bigger company have the luxury and do that. For smaller company, other than the content that we have, should we focus on the niche and then try to own that niche, or like how would you advise them to stand out more and to get more market share in the space?
So when we onboard clients, we take them through a discovery process. And in
Mhm.
that discovery process, we want to understand the business. And one of the things we start with is we look at macro trends, which are things that they can't control that may be impacting their business, and micro trends, which are things that maybe they could control that competitors are doing or otherwise.
Mhm.
And the reason we do that is, let's say you've got a competitor in your category and they can spend a lot of money on marketing. You can vampire some of their traffic. So if you know they're going to talk about something, you talk about it too, but you talk about it from your perspective. So that way you show up in the same feeds and in the same, that means that you have to stay on top of it. So like if they're going to be interviewed by a news station today, or they're going to be on a radio show, or they're going to put out something, you need to be very quick to respond with your own sort of take so that you can at least help kind of carry that forward. There's room in every single industry for multiple companies. Not everybody wants to work with the number one company. Not everyone can. So your niche may be that you service like a specific market, right? Like we service primarily financial services, insurance, med tech, and some SaaS, but those are, they're kind of, I call them boring industries. And a lot of other companies won't touch those, right? Like they want to do the more sexy, like, oh, we want to take a new car to market or whatever. We don't do that. Like we do like financial services and insurance and whatever. So if you want to work with a company who really understands, and we have to understand the language very, very well. A lot of other marketing companies they can't get into that kind of language. So that's one of the ways that we can differentiate ourselves from competitors who are bigger than us, who have bigger budgets. It's really thinking about what is it that we do and using what they may say about themselves as a way to get people to kind of shine a spotlight on us.
Yeah. Well, so you work with clients that are really long sales cycle, and definitely they need to, and obviously they're up against big mega company out there. There are a lot of company out there, and you're right. Depending on the tick, and I think nowadays the strategy really is, there are a lot of people play video games. Like we don't own a video game, but there are streamers that make a living talk about video games. So
I
obviously
know.
they didn't make that, but they have the personality or they have the skills or whatever that is in between. People watch that, and it actually became a profession. So,
Yeah, I know. Isn't that crazy? But I mean, it's so different than probably when people first started getting paid to play football. People were probably like, they're paying them to play football? Like, that's crazy, right? So it's just a new trend of a type of quote unquote sports, if you want to call it that. Yeah.
So Eric, I know that we could go into multiple topic for another 2 hours on each topic. So like my final question for you will be, for a business owner out there who understand that they need to be on the marketing side, they realize that there are many touch points that they might or might not be able to do it themselves. And so what would you guide us moving forward as a small business? Like, are there trends that you see that's working, or are you wanted them to focusing on certain size, or what would you advise us out there?
So I mean, we talked a little bit about like the creation of content. You've got to create content and meaningful content on a consistent basis and really kind of get ahead of yourself. So build a calendar so that you're not always trying to catch up. So like, hey, I'm going to build this. So that planning is really important. And of all the things that you could outsourcing, let's say if you're a small business, some of the things like social media, which is like really kind of has to stay consistent. Like that's one of the easier things for you to give to someone else to do while you're like running your company, kind of like accounting or whatever. And I talk about, make sure that you're let someone else author and you're the editor. And that's the same thing with AI. So like you can let AI author the thing, but you need to edit it. You need to curate it, make sure it's from your perspective, that it's not a lie. Same thing you would do if you had a writer write something for you. So understand for all the content that needs to be created, you probably can't create it all yourself. So make sure you have kind of trusted people who get you like 90% of the way there. And then you do the 10% you need to really make it hit your audience and be authentic to who you are.
Yeah, I love that. Especially you need, as a small business professional, need to take, you have to have the final read of the final cut, whatever. Even if you hire the best editor and you use ChatGPT or whatever, the spelling or the term that is present, maybe the phrases that you use, you have to check it, because they're pulling sources from the internet, and sometimes the internet, not everything that you read is true.
And within your industry, there may be specific words. So like when I was doing my book, we went through a copy edit and there were some words that they wanted to change. And I'm like, no, that's the word in this industry. Like if you change that word, it doesn't mean the same thing. So you have to make sure we're in an era of curation. So it's not about creation, it's curation. So having things brought to you and being able to curate them and say, this is good, this is bad, these are the things you should pay attention to. So as an entrepreneur, expert in your field, you need to think about yourself as the great curator.
Yeah. If you have a name like Swire, if you go through autocorrect, it will come out something different.
Holtzclaw too, same thing.
So Eric, if listener have specific question, wanted to reach out to you, what would be the best way to get in touch?
So I was a big Twitter guy, but now I'm more on LinkedIn. So if you're looking for me, LinkedIn is a good place to kind of track me down. I of course own ericholtzclaw.com, and of course you can go to ligerpartners.com. But connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd be glad to chat with you there.
Thank you so much for coming on today, Eric. I learned a lot from you.
Appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity.